What is going on, Diablo 2 fans? Dobrunsky here. In today's video, I'm going to be covering the secret hidden changes that were implemented to Whirlwind in patch 2.4.3. So again, not really secret because Hezwriter did post on Twitter the amendments that have been made to Whirlwind, but it's actually received quite a few, in addition to quality of life changes, some substantial damage changes as well as scaling changes, and kind of tweaks with two-handed weapons versus one-handed weapons, and now how the increased attack speed calculation applies to the IS breakpoints that you can hit with this skill. So in a lot of ways, it has been significantly improved, sort of buffed, but in other ways, I guess potentially nerfed depending on the weapon choice that you're going to use. So I'm going to cover my overall thoughts, kind of the pros and cons of the new Whirlwind changes, as well as kind of a closing remark in general that I have just about how I feel about melee characters in D2. So hopefully you guys enjoy this video. Again, a quick reminder before we jump in, just want to let you guys know that if you do enjoy this YouTube content, I do stream twice a week on Twitch. I got the link for my Twitch channel in the description below, so any follows on that platform would be very much appreciated. That being said, guys, let's jump in. So starting off talking about some of the pros to the new Whirlwind changes, the first major standout one is the base damage at level 1 is now plus 30 instead of negative 50. And in addition to that, the attack rating has jumped from 0 to plus 50. This is going to work a lot better for characters with sort of mediocre gear, trying to level and build up as a Whirlwind Barbarian. It's actually a viable choice now. You don't get slapped with a negative 50% damage penalty at the first level. Like, that was very tough. So this change is welcome in the fact, or in the sense of like leveling with mid-tier gear as a Whirlwind Barbarian. It just gives you an option to do that now, so I think that's very good. In addition to those changes, slower weapon bases now are more viable. That is because your offhand IS will now count towards the breakpoints of Whirlwind. So you can't exceed the 4 frames from LOD, but prior to this patch change, basically the only weapons you would ever use would be Grief or Breath of the Dying in a Whirlwind Barbarian, because those were the weapons that allowed you to reach a specific breakpoint. So now these changes have opened up different options like Breath of the Dying and Thunder Maul, which is a slow attack base. Death is probably the coolest one, I think. The 50% Deadly Strike and 50% Crushing Blow per character level. You could have like Death in a Colossus Spade, Colossus Sword, or maybe Berserker Axe. You could dual wield them to have up to 100% Crushing Blow, 100% Deadly Strike. Although I will say that with my limited testing, it really does feel like Dual Grief is just better. But in addition to other weapon combinations, which I do think is a good thing for the Barbarian, short Whirlwinds are now no longer nerfed. So they used to miss an actual attack frame. So if you Whirlwind short enough, you actually wouldn't do any damage. So the combination of different weapon combos and the short Whirlwind being a thing now, that is definitely a big buff to the Whirlwind Barbarian. But unfortunately, I've found with my limited testing that Dual Grief just seems to be the better option. I'm going to talk about this later, about the concept behind nerfing Grief. I think it's a good idea in terms of weapon options, but I think it's a bad idea in terms of melee is kind of at a disadvantage, so I'm not sure I'm a big fan. But the final big change here, that in addition to short Whirlwinds, two-handed weapons, the first initial strike, it used to only come from the first weapon, and then different consecutive strikes after that would be from both weapons. But now the initial strike is going to take into account both hits, so if you're dual-wielding Grief, your first strike is going to count from 2 weapon hits. So that is, in a nutshell, a lot stronger for dual-hand wielding Barbarians, so like Dual Grief, etc. Very, very positive changes overall for Whirlwind. There has, however, been a couple disadvantages that in my eyes have been introduced to Whirlwind. This is largely due to the changes to the increased attack speed. So previous to this patch, in original LOD, if you were Decrepit, had Holy Freeze active on you, or if you didn't have a source of Canopy Frozen, Whirlwind would only be affected in the distance that it takes to travel from point A to point B. So that would be a lot slower, but the actual Whirlwind itself would remain unchanged. With these new increased attack speed changes, if you are Decrepit, Holy Freeze, or if you don't have a source of Canopy Frozen, in addition to point A to point B being slowed down, the actual Whirlwind itself will be slowed down. Now, I haven't done a ton of calculations or like breaking out spreadsheets and whatnot, but I didn't notice too much of a disadvantage when I was dual wielding Grief with like standard High Lords and laying hand gear. The slowdown didn't really seem to affect me that much, but when I did mess around with a couple different weapon choices like Death that actually have no increased attack speed, it was noticeable. Now, not to the fact like it felt like my DPS completely tanked, but it is one thing to be aware of. So depending on the weapon combination that you're using, you may or may not want to supplement with a little bit extra increased attack speed to kind of counteract that slowdown. Maybe if you're farming a lot of Chaos Sanctuary or something like that. Now again, I'll leave those calculations to people that want to set up IS calculators for the new Whirlwind breakpoints, but honestly, Dual Grief, I didn't really notice a difference. And the second disadvantage, now this largely comes down to the damage scaling changes, which I don't really necessarily agree with, but with endgame gear, so I think around level 29, or 30, new Whirlwind is actually less enhanced damage than the previous one. Now, With that being said, all the quality of life changes, the short Whirlwind fix, the changes to the first attack of your dual wielding weapons, that is all positive changes and more damage, but I kind of think that melee is already at a significant disadvantage to any other caster build, so I think it would have been cool if they just left the +8 scaling per level. It just would have meant that you'd have like a plus 270% ED Whirlwind at level 30 or something instead of plus 180. I don't think that would break the game because melee is already, again, like I said, it's such a significant disadvantage. It just would have made the Whirlwind Barbarian a little bit stronger. And with that being said, the quality of life, all that other changes and stuff is fantastic, but that is kind of a disadvantage with Torch, Annie, Enigma, High Lords, like all your expensive endgame gear. You actually have less raw enhanced damage than what you did before. So overall, I do genuinely think that the changes to Whirlwind have been a net positive. It's greater quality of life. Using quick cast is really just so much smoother than the previous system. Again, in my opinion, I am definitely pro quick cast. In addition to the quick cast and the quality of life, no longer execute that stupid single normal attack if you're close to a monster, so you can like telestomp right on packs and then just start whirlwinding away again just using your quick cast system. It just feels very smooth. There's different gear options now. You're not tied to using dual grief, even though it is the best, but you could definitely use like dual death or death in a colossal sword until you get dual grief. And then the buffed attack rating and damage starting at earlier levels does make it a lot better to use with sort of mediocre geared characters, so I think that is all fantastic. I personally would have liked to seen 8+ scaling per level, because again, I just talked about melee being a disadvantage, but I do want to talk about this. This is kind of just a question I'm throwing out to you guys. A lot of people have mentioned nerfing grief to try and provide other weapon options. Like, that's what I think that they were trying to do here. Similar to what they did with the Fear Druid, they're just trying to open up different weapon combinations, and I do think it's a fantastic idea at its core. But the problem is grief is just so much stronger than everything else that it just boils down to almost every build using grief. Now, people have proposed nerfing grief to make other weapon choices more viable. My huge issue that I have with that is I genuinely feel like melee is at a massive disadvantage to caster characters, Blizzard, Lightning Sorcerers, Nova Sorcerers, Hammerdins, Fist Evans Paladins, Corpse Explosion Necros, etc. They're just at a huge disadvantage, so nerfing the one single weapon that is their strongest choice, I personally think is a bad idea. I think that Death and Breath of the Dying and other weapon choices should maybe be elevated so that they are closer to grief to give you a different option, like maybe higher raw enhanced damage. I think that would be a better choice than kind of nerfing grief, but that's kind of what I want to close this overall video on, is just, that's my overall thoughts. I think Whirlwind is definitely a net positive gain, and I wanted to throw out that question to you guys. Like, I just think that nerfing grief is a bad idea. But that's kind of all I have today for my Talking Head video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Again, let me know in the comment section below if you guys agree, disagree, you think I missed anything major. I haven't done any crazy testing, but overall it just feels like it's better. Dual grief is still the best, but there's more weapon choices. That's pretty much the best way to sum it up. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Again, if you could throw a like on it, that'd be awesome. I'll catch you guys on my next video or live stream. Peace out.